Brings us to amendment number 9. This amendment is labeled G.1, again by our drafter, Doug Gardner, who's also online, dated 3/22/16. And this amendment comes about through conversations with Senator Berta Gardner and individuals who have been a part of a movement to ask the state legislature to consider, as we have redefined the area of prostitution in many ways, to describe the very awful fact of sex trafficking. And we've been doing that sort of piecemeal through the years, that there are still some residual effects. And the bill that one of the bills that she introduced would actually completely legalize prostitution. This amendment is a narrow approach to addressing some of the very valid concerns that I felt we could deal with in a timely manner and incorporate into Senate Bill 91. So the amendment to Senate Bill 91 provides immunity for the charge of prostitution if the person contacts law enforcement when they are the victim of or witness to violent crimes against themselves or others. The violent crimes are enumerated in the amendment to include all degrees of murder, all degrees of assault, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. The proposal is a narrow legal mechanism that allows prostitutes and victims of sex trafficking to report criminal acts without being faced with the risk of arrest. So if you kind of think about some of the earlier bills we've passed in this committee regarding people who are using drugs or participating in a potential drug crime, reporting the fact that an individual is in a life health safety threat. One of the goals of this amendment is law enforcement gaining access to a criminal underworld populated by violent johns and sex offenders. So our hope is that by making reports, encouraging reports, and giving immunity, that law enforcement will be able to go deeper inside this network of harmful individuals. Another goal is to provide police protection to people that work in the sex trade who might face the additional risks of violence at the hands of their customers or their pimps, leaving them vulnerable to further victimization. I'd like to acknowledge that prostitution itself remains illegal. However, a victim of rape, assault, and murder is still a human being under the eyes of the law, and the perpetrator of that crime should not be allowed to avoid prosecution simply because the victim is in a position of fear such that they are afraid to call the police. Prostitutes and victims of sex trafficking are among the most vulnerable and underserved of all of our populations, both here in Alaska and across the United States, frankly, across the world. People that work in the sex trade are as diverse as any other group or industry worldwide. However, those at the very bottom of the economic ladder are faced with exponential rates of danger and bodily risk on a daily basis. A recent study conducted at the University of California, Berkeley, revealed that of the 130 people working as prostitutes in the Bay Area, 82% of them had been physically assaulted, 83% of them had been threatened by a weapon, 68% of them had been raped, and 84% of them had reported current or past homelessness. Another recent study of prostitutes in Colorado Springs found they were 18 times more likely to be murdered than non-prostitutes of the same age and race. Some legal analysts suggest that legalization of prostitution is the only true way to keep sex workers and trafficking victims safe. To avoid that drastic step and policy choice at this moment, an alternative is reached in this amendment to reach a goal of providing criminal immunity to prostitution in the narrow event that the prostitute is a victim or a witness to a violent crime that has been reported to law enforcement in a timely manner. So that's the amendment, and there was an objection so I could describe it. Are there further questions about the amendment or further discussions? Okay, hearing and seeing none, then amendment number 9 carries.
We will now go to the audience in Juneau. And we have first here in the audience, Tara Burns from Community United for Safety Protection. Tara, will you join us up front here?
Thank you. My name's Tara Burns. I'm with the Community United for Safety and Protection, and we are a group of current and former Alaskan sex workers, sex trafficking victims, and our allies working towards safety and protection for everyone in Alaska's sex industry. And we are strongly in support of House Bill 205. House Bill 205 is a timely fix to statutes that no longer serve Alaskans. House Bill 205 is an important step that has to be taken now in light of evidence-based research in combination with Alaska's reduced financial circumstances. We don't want Alaska to end up like California with no money and the prison system in federal receivership. We support House Bill 205 also because there are members of our community who are serving really long prison sentences for, what are defined as crimes against public decency. And if House Bill 205 passed, it would allow those members of our community to be at home with their children and to not, have them lose their housing and become a burden on the state when they get out of prison. We would like to see language added to House Bill 205 to address the needs of victims and witnesses of crime by including language from Senate Bill 21. Senate Bill 21 clarifies and updates the intent of the prostitution statute and expands public safety by including 16 violent crimes that victims or witnesses would be allowed to report without the threat of being charged with prostitution. And this is needed. I did research at UAF in my graduate degree in 2014. I consulted with 48 people who had worked recently in Alaska's sex trade. 74% of them said that they had been the victim or witness of a crime that they did not report because they were afraid of being charged with prostitution. Of the subgroup of people who did try to report crimes and who could also be defined federally as sex trafficking victims, 80% of them said that they were turned away by the police. 60% said that they were threatened with arrest, and 33% were actually arrested while they were trying to report that they had been the victim or witness of a crime. We urge your support for House Bill 205 and ask you to please include the language from Senate Bill 21. It is against our Alaskan values to allow criminals to target our most vulnerable community members with impunity. And in considering amending House Bill 205 with the language to protect victims from Senate Bill 205, we ask you to please include 5 additional crimes that people should be able to report without being charged. Extortion, coercion, and robbery are the crimes that are most frequently committed against sex workers and sex trafficking victims. And then while they are less common, we think it's also really important that people be able to report sexual assault of a minor or possession or distribution of child pornography without with confidence that they will not be charged with prostitution as a result of making that report. Reconfiguring the many statutes in House Bill 205 are a priority, and so must be protecting Alaska's most vulnerable with language from Senate Bill 21 in this 29th legislative session. Thank you so much for hearing my testimony, and I'm available for any questions.
Thanks, Tara. Anybody have any questions for Tara? Thanks for waiting around. So we are now on Amendment number 7. Amendment number 7 is my amendment. So I am going to move amendment number 7, and I hope somebody will
object for discussion purposes.
Okay. So what amendment number 7 does is it basically clarifies that someone cannot be prosecuted for sex trafficking of themselves. And the idea for this amendment came to me when I was approached by some folks representing sex workers who said that this actually happened in Fairbanks. And at first I didn't believe this person because it was so ludicrous that anybody could actually be charged with trafficking themselves. But there was actually a case. And we've been told that that was a mistake, but I want to make sure that no mistakes happen like this again. So we're doing this amendment. Are there any questions for me?
Question.
Representative Lynn?
How does that, that similar to the following amendment, amendment number 8?
I haven't,
You haven't looked at it.
oh, amendment number, just a second. Try to find amendment number 8.
I'm getting some information here.
Amendment number 8, which is your amendment, Representative Lynn, that basically, as I understand amendment number 8, it makes certain that if somebody reports somebody else for sex trafficking, that they're shielded from prosecution if they have made that report. So they're kind of similar in that they're protecting the same group of people, but yet they're distinct problems.
So one doesn't negate the other.
No, one does not negate the other.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
Madam Chair, I will remove my objection to amendment number 7.
thank you, Representative Millett. And if I don't see any other objections, amendment number 7 passes. We are now going to take a brief at ease. So we have before us amendment number 8.
Madam Chair, I move amendment number 8.
And I'm going to object for purposes of discussion.
Thank you. This amendment is similar to an amendment by Senator McGuire on the Senate version of this particular bill. An amendment is aimed at protecting sex workers, such as prostitutes, who make a good faith report to law enforcement of one of 21 types of violent crimes. It prevents the sex workers from being charged with a certain type of misdemeanor, prostitution, as a result of making a good faith report. And it does not offer immunity for other crimes or for future acts of prostitution. And I think this amendment is basically a common sense step toward getting actual and proper information to the police without doing an injustice to the reporter of the crime.
And does anybody have any questions for or comments? Representative Keller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not intimately familiar with the crimes, but what I mean is what they mean and all the terminology. I'm not aware. But what I'm calling attention to is on page 1 of your amendment, Representative Lynn, line 14, subsection H. The question is whether you want to stop prosecution of prostitution if a report comes in that there was a sexual assault in the 4th degree, when the definition of that, and I will read it, is if by words or other conduct that person recklessly places another person in fear of imminent physical injury. It seems like a pretty easy thing to report. I like the amendment. It just, that particular one seems like it might become a tool. I mean, I don't know, and I just throw it on the table for discussion.
Well, I would, Madam Chair, I would be happy to have somebody help me with the definition of this type, but you're saying if somebody comes in and says boo to the prostitute, that would cause them not to prosecuted?
And that was the question I was asking you. Now that a non-attorney has made a complete fool of myself with the question, I'm hoping that I get bailed out by an attorney.
Okay,
Madam, I'll be happy to give this a shot.
Representative Clayman.
Because between the chair and myself, I spent more time in a life of crime than Representative will do.
You spent more time where?
In jail.
I was jokingly saying in a life of crime, doing criminal prosecution and defense. I think the intent with the amendment is to provide a degree of safety to basically sex workers who who feel they've been assaulted and not feel like they need to hesitate to go to the police for fear they're going to be arrested for prostitution because they've reported an assault. And there certainly is evidence, and I think some substantial evidence, about a lot of physical and sexual abuse that occurs to sex workers. And so even though you're correct that assault 4 is basically an assault by placing somebody in fear and not actually injuring them, I think having read some of the reports of people that actually are never physically injured but are threatened by pimps and others that are trying to control the prostitutes, that actual placing in fear is a significant area in which we're trying to provide protection to sex workers, so that the pimp can't essentially say to the prostitute, well, you can go to the police office, but since you're not injured, they're not going to believe you and they'll arrest you for prostitution anyway.
And if I may, and of course, in addition to that, we have Johns who come in and they show the prostitute pictures of child pornography or something like that, totally unrelated to what's going on there, and nobody wants to report that. All kinds of things. Somebody brings in 11 or 12-year-old girl into the room there, and if the prostitute reports that in good faith, they could be arrested themselves. So just kind of a blanket thing, we have to examine the seriousness of what goes on in some of these situations, and we need to protect the general public, and sometimes to help make that happen, I think we need to protect the reporter, which in this case might be a prostitute.
And I agree with
Representative Clayman.
And I agree with Representative Lynn's observations. I suppose the other pragmatic reality is that, as a general, and we are not by this bill legalizing prostitution, but as a general concept, prostitutes usually are not anxious to go down and visit their local police office.
I would think not.
So there's kind of a
Representative
disincentive.
Lynn, and I'm gonna, even though I said to be informal, which I still want to be, if I don't identify you folks by name, then Christie's gonna have difficulties.
Madam Chair,
Representative Keller.
I move Amendment 1 to Amendment 8. And that, explain what I'm thinking is that we just exclude 11.41.230 subparagraph 3. That's the only, and I just want to clarify for the record, I fully understood what the enlightenment that I just got. What I'm concerned with is that we're opening a door here for an abuse to what we intend, and I think we just take that section out, we may solve the problem. So on page, what I'm suggesting is on line 14, page 1. Assault in the fourth degree under AS 11.41.230 subparagraph A1 and A2.
And I'm going to object.
Madam Chair, could I have Representative Keller explain what that is that he's attempting to remove, other than just the numbers?
Representative Lynn, I what I foresee, and this is clumsy to talk about, but it is a situation where you have prostitution, and it becomes a norm that, the excuse is, well, I was somebody said boo, as you said, Representative Lynn, and therefore there is no consequence, for prostitution. So my question is, does this put a means in there for legalizing prostitution? That's the question I have. And I think it ought to be right on the table, even if we decide to proceed with it. So I hope that.
And I would oppose the amendment.
So sounds like we're going to have to take a roll call.
This is on the amendment. Right?
This is on the amendment to the amendment.
Which would just to make sure I understand, it would basically take assault in the fourth degree out of the crimes that were in which there's an exemption.
Negative. I'll re-clarify. It's on line 14, the subparagraph H, just inserting after 230 the subparagraphs that exclude the part about being afraid.
So it would allow a fear. You couldn't get it for a fear assault, but you could get it for a physical assault.
Right.
Go ahead.
Representative Keller,
Yes.
Representative Lynch,
No.
Representative Millett, Representative Clayman,
No.
Representative Price Thompson,
No.
Representative Butno, Chair Ledoux.
No.
There's 1 yay, 5 nays.
4 nays.
Oh, excuse me, 4. I apologize. I keep thinking Representative Millett.
It's okay. She might be right.
All right. Well, then let's go to.
Amendment fails.
So the amendment to the amendment fails.
Yeah, I'm going to go away mad, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. But
Go
you
ahead
can't
with the
make everybody happy in this business.
It's amendment number 8, and that puts us back on.
So we are back to amendment number 8. I will withdraw my objection. Are there any other objections? Or any more discussion? All right, then amendment number 8 passes.